Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan and this is the Grass10 update with Grass10 Advisor Niamh Doyle with grassland management tips for the month ahead.
Weather has improved hugely there in the past week. Ground conditions has improved and ground has dried out, and it's a great chance to get animals out. Start grazing them with your priority stock, so your weanlings, your yearlings, and aim for a grass cover of between 800 to 1,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare to allow the animals to be conditioned to graze. Even look with the lightest ones in the shed and put them over a large area to avoid poaching or damage. Once you start grazing, then aim for a post-grazing height of 3.5 to 4 centimetres on the first rotation to set up paddocks for the rest of the year. Graze 1/3 of grazing ground before moving on to the silage ground. For suckler farmers then, as cows are calved, it's important then to get these out the grass. Ensure the paddock is sheltered for calves, it's close to the yard, so it's easy to let them in or out if needed. Ensure then you let them out on a dry day to allow the calves to acclimatise to the weather. Just from talking there to Peter Doyle, researcher working on the Dairy Patrick herd in Grange, they are currently halfway through calving. Cows and calves and replacement heifers were all turned out there on Monday the 3rd of March. The cows and calves were let out to a sheltered paddock close to the yard. Over time then, they will graze both the grazing and the silage ground with different groups allocated to each area, whether that's the silage ground or the grazing ground. The plan then for them is to have the silage ground closed up by the end of March.
And what are the current targets need for farmers that have yet to start grazing this spring?
It's important then, I suppose, to get out and get grazing. Aim for that cover, of 800 to 1,000 kilos to allow the animals to be conditioned to graze. If we look actually at grass growth then, over the past week, we have seen growth rates above normal, thanks to the recent weather conditions. Dry matter levels are high and soil temperatures are around 7 degrees. So once conditions allow, I suppose it's important for the farmer to walk the farm, pick out the paddocks they plan to graze, prepare fences or water troughs or anything like that. And I suppose complete a spring rotation planner as well, so that you can map out your grazing to ensure then that you're not grazing too fast or grazing too slow. Also then I suppose they need to start thinking about silage ground, whether they're going to graze it or not. For example, lower stocked farms, for example, dairy calf to beef farms where they might only have weanlings turned out, they might decide to only graze part of their silage ground or might not graze it at all. Whether, higher stock farms such as Dairy Patrick herd, which is a suckler herd, they might plan to graze both the grazing ground and the silage ground together. But, it is important though to graze that 1/3 of grazing ground first, because you need this back for your second rotation in April.
And assessing the regrowth on that ground is very important, because there is a fear that cattle being turned out now, Niamh, that they could graze the grazing area too fast. And then to avoid that happening, it's really important to have that spring rotation planner and look at the regrowth that's coming back.
Exactly, and that spring rotation planner will, ensure that you're not going too fast or going too slow through these paddocks. And it's a plan more than that. And then whether that's, you can keep it basic, you don't have to have anything technical. Whether that's you've 12 paddocks to graze, divide that. Say there's 2 months left, so that's paddock and a bit every week. It's as simple as that. Keep it simple, and it's just a plan at the end of the day to make sure you're keeping on target.
And then in relation to fertiliser and slurry, how has the application of slurry been going on farms at the moment, given the recent weather conditions?
So I suppose weather conditions are favourable there for slurry, and I suppose some tanks have needed to be emptied. However, I would prioritise your slurry for silage fields, as they tend to have a higher demand for P and K. And research has shown that spreading slurry on silage ground can increase dry matter yield by over 1 tonne per hectare compared to using chemical fertiliser. So that's why it's important to target your slurry application to your silage ground if you can. If slurry is available then for grazing ground, focus on fields that have already been grazed or those with a lower grass cover. So especially those with low P and K indices. Spread around 15 to 1,000 gallons per acre on those fields. As always, ensure then you follow the proper guidelines for your buffer zones and rainfall before spreading.
And then in relation to chemical fertiliser, there are probably 2 situations on farms, Niamh, at the moment. Some farmers will have gone with 20 or 23 units already of nitrogen, and there are probably farmers that have no fertiliser applied yet. What would you be advising farmers in either of those situations?
I suppose, yes, there is two situations. There's those who have gone out with maybe half a bag of protected urea, and then there's those who haven't started yet. So I suppose as we enter March, we need to start thinking about compound fertiliser. However, it's important to check your limits first. So your P, if you have a P allowance, a good target then is to apply 1.5 bags of 18-6-12 in March, as P will boost growth. And I suppose for those who haven't got fertiliser out yet, there is that maybe, to go with that compound might be a bit more beneficial in mid-March there to boost that growth. However, for those then who have gone with protected urea or half a bag, they also need to consider a compound at this time of year. But however, if they're planning on going out with just chemical N, it's important then to target these to dry fields with optimum soil fertility, containing a high proportion of perennial ryegrass and covers with above 6 centimetres to 500 kilos. And do not spread on wet soils, and ensure at least 48 hours without heavy rainfall is forecasted when spreading chemical fertiliser. And I suppose when you're spreading fertiliser, it will also depend on your demand. So if your demand is lower, you're not going to be going out with blanket spreading the whole farm. You'll be just targeting your drier fields with that optimum soil fertility.
And it is really important that farmers liaise with their local advisor to update their nutrient management plan so that they know what their limits are, Niamh. That's a real critical point. What are the 3 top tips you have for farmers in the coming weeks?
So the first one, I suppose, is to get out grazing. March is a crucial time to maximise grass in the diet. Second message then will be spread your chemical fertiliser and make a plan for slurry application, whether that's targeting your silage ground or your grazing ground. And 3 then is complete a spring rotation planner. So take some time to map out your grazing and fertiliser plans for the next few weeks to ensure everything runs smoothly.
That's great, Niamh, and there are a number of grazing events taking place in the coming weeks across the country, and I'll include the link in the podcast text for farmers to see where their local event is on.
Thanks very much, Catherine.
That's all for this month's Grass10 update. Join me next week for your Beef Edge podcast.